providing this opportunity to be here with you. And I totally agree with my predecessors who I had the opportunity to work either in the trenches of negotiations, like, with Lorena, and also as a partner in crime, for this Act 2025 and all the consortium opportunity with the 5Cs. And I would like, and the reason why, it matters so much for the Open Society Foundation, I think, based on everything that Lorena and Colin have just said, the Open Society Foundation decided, our climate justice program is new. It's only 18 months old. Prior to joining, there was a decision to test this avenue, but it's only 18 months old. And, one of the things that, we decided to prioritize is the issue of adaptation and loss and damage, for the reasons that have been exposed, earlier, by our two speakers, and also to look into the just dimension of the just transitions, that, we have to pursue according to the IPCC report. And I hope that, I will get some support, to have my slides, shared whilst it is being, uploaded. I think, I agree with what has been also said about the highlights of the IPCC report. But one of the things that is a little bit different from the others is a recognition that a lot of emphasis has been given to the technical efforts to be, for addressing climate change. And there's been more emphasis this time around on the notion of climate justice, which is what I want to emphasize during my talk. And also the emphasis about, the severity and the dimension of loss and damage, and the lack of finance, for both adaptation and loss and damage. So if we go to the next slide. I think first is, why there's been that emphasis on climate justice. This is because, it's, the fight, for this climate crisis needs to bring, those people-centered lens. So climate justice is not just, a subsistence and coping in a process. It is about ensuring communities to thrive, not just to resist, but to thrive in a world transformed by climate impacts. And I think if we go to the next slides, the definition itself is again ensuring that people get what is due to them. It takes into account, the moral legacy principles of fairness and equity that Rena, mentioned. The fact that those having contributed the most to the problems, need to be held accountable, especially when you see that those who bear, the disproportionately the effects of climate have not contributed much to the problem. So climate justice is also linking the development and human rights dimension, and aims to achieve a human-centered approach to address climate change by safeguarding the rights of the most vulnerable people. And it looks at, the cost, but also the benefit sharing of the burden and benefit sharing of climate change and the actions. And also, I think it brings a dimension of humility, because, we need to look into the unintended impact sometimes of climate change to make sure that, the way, the journey is as just as possible and does not leave anyone behind. I think that that explanation, that description is made builds on many different sources, of what climate justice is. There's not a formal, definition, but from literature you could see, where it's coming from. And I think this has been, again, emphasized. Sorry, I am suffering also from a fever, and the notion of building resilience that was highlighted, and the urgency of building that resilience is really at the core also of climate justice. The resilience of societies that are most at risk of climate change is threatened to allow them to remain where they are, the right to stay, to collectively relocate in dignity when they have to, because of sea level rise, and to adapt without coercion. Climate justice requires also predictable, equitable, accessible financial sources, which has not been the case so far. And so far, from the climate finance, only 2% of climate finance has reached small islands, and only 14% the least developed countries. So you could see that inequality and inequity so far when it comes to climate finance that Colin also alluded to, too little, too late so far. And yet vulnerable countries have always innovated, have been at the forefront of solutions. They have tried to experience, some financial, architectural processes like, green bonds, as you could see in the Belize's blue bonds, as well as Rwanda, Jamaica. They've been really leaders, when it comes to actually shaking the Bretton Woods system. I think, many of you have heard President Maya Motley from Barbados about this Bridgetown agenda, which is really a proposal that triggers a global conversation and discussion on how to really reform the financial system. And you also have alliances on top of those formal negotiations, alliances that Buena highlighted. You have groups like the V20. The Climate Vulnerable Forum is made of 58 countries and has a subgroup of finance ministers that actually just released what is called the Accra to Marrakesh roadmap. This is, and I think many of Caribbean countries are members, and it really laid out, some specific and robust proposal on how to really scale up climate finance, and also make it more accessible and affordable. It touched upon the issue of debt, the issue of access, how to also position and get a more equitable carbon market that also does not undermine environmental integrity. So, and why Accra to Marrakesh is because the chair of this group is from Ghana, and there's been a first consultation started in Accra, and the next spring meeting of the World Bank, of all the development finance institutions, the World Bank, IMF, will meet in Marrakesh later this year, and there needs to be some sort of call for reshaping, revolutionized, even if there's going to be probably low-hanging fruit that are more incremental changes, but really forcing that debate. So I just wanted to pause and to highlight, and I think this was alluded by Rowena and Colin, the leadership of vulnerable nations. And this is something that, OSF is really keen to continue to amplify. I think the other dimension, and this is the next slide, is, what does, IPCC says concretely about the climate justice, right? So if we go to the next slide. So hold on just a second. I think that I've got some. Do you hear me still?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So climate impact on people and ecosystems, are more extensive and severe, as you heard, and future risks, will rise rapidly. And what it also says is, every fraction of a degree of warming will bring, a flurry of disasters and intensity. And this is why, we need to make, every effort to, to work to minimize, to mitigate now. The climate crisis also threatens economic, social, and health security. It definitely uh, really jeopardize all the development gains that have been made by countries, and you see that when a hurricane strikes, when it affects more than 200% or, a big share of the percentage of GDP for that country. Um, so that's, and also I think what also the the IPCC emphasized is how this is a threat multiplier, security exacerbate, national insecurity it exacerbates, in national and international insecurity. And what I put here, 950 million of people in the world's grasslands will face water stress, heat stress, desertification. 24% more people will be susceptible of flooding. Sorry. And, these are some of the facts, that could emerge from, that emerges from the IPCC that the media can definitely amplify. If we go to the next slide. I think when it comes to, I think before actually touching upon what is currently in this slide, I wanted to touch base a little bit on the justice and inclusion dimension and how important the empowerment of women and youth, as well as meaningful collaboration with indigenous people and local community, are really part of the justice journey, and are also critical, for a successful approach that is more holistic, that just that the technocratic approach that we've seen so far. And this is important, when we think about the ecosystem-based adaptation strategies. We also know that only one in every $10, over climate spends goes to adaptation. I think it was also mentioned. So the climate finance, the social dimension, the participatory approach is really important to take into account. I think we already touched upon some of those statistics, when it comes to finance. I wanted to also highlight that overshooting is a real possibility, and the risk that Rena highlighted intergenerationally, really are important to take into account, which is why the participatory process and how to bring our youth and is important. The energy sector and the just transition to renewable energy is both an adaptation and a mitigation effort, and bring benefits in both sides. And it also requires the reimagination and further efforts to make sure that we get social and environmental safeguards and inclusion across also the value chains. This is important. I think, we know that the dash to renewable will also create a dash to critical minerals, and we want to make sure that, we don't reproduce some of the curses of the fossil fuel or mining industries that we've seen, afterwards. So, and this is why I think the notion of unintended impacts, what this means and how we make sure that all the sectors are resilient and embark in a just manner to those challenges, are done. I think the other dimension that I wanted to highlight is on climate mobility. And I think this is what you see, which is front and center. This is an issue that we care about, at Open Society. I think the IPCC has high confidence, which means really certainty that climate change is contribution to humanitarian crisis, and climate and weather extremes, are increasing and driving displacement in all regions of the world, with small islands, of course, disproportionately affected because of sea level rise. When it comes to the Horn of Africa alone, we know that droughts could displace 700 million. When it comes to the case of Pakistan, the equivalent of Canada's population has been displaced, 30 million just in one event. And when it comes to our region, the Caribbean, 3 major hurricanes within a month have displaced 3 million people. And so I think, this is a dimension also that, needs to be taken into account, as we also build, our capacity. And I think, the stakes of, I think we talked about this earlier, the stakes of, or the risk, are higher for every policy choices that we make today. There's no room for failure because some of the development reduces the underlying vulnerability that are associated, with conflicts exacerbated by climate change, infrastructural vulnerability, and the inequality that we already faces in our society. So I think, my last slides, I think, is, touching upon the solutions, that the IPCC also want us to consider. And when it comes to those solutions, I think reconfiguring the social protection programs, the cash transfers, public programs, social safety nets, to include adaptation, can reduce communities' vulnerability to a wide range of future climate impacts, and while also at the same time strengthen justice and equity. The policymakers, can design mitigation strategies that really also reinforce adaptation strategies. And we need to see policy interventions dedicated to expanding the access to public, to also public transit. It's the case also to, on the transport side, to minimize, some of our consumption, and also to really, I think, one of the, coming from the IMF World Bank spring meeting that happened last week, there's a false discourse and a false dichotomy that is still prevalent, that I think the leadership of small islands can really counter, and that can be amplified by the media, which is, that there's no force, there's no dichotomy between development and climate. They are, both sides of the same coins. And what actually these developed countries or small islands are asking for is, additionality to stop, to stop this forced competition between development and climate. So I think this creating, those synergies and understanding that, those climate actions can be a means to a more prosperous future, is really important. And I think when it comes to the opportunity for advocacy and to build on, Colin's, suggestions, I think the IPCC report is a proof that everything is at stake, and that we have that narrowing window of opportunity, and both the intercessions, the climate negotiations in June at COP, and also the UNGA in September are marquee moments that media, can mobilize, upon. I think there's also regional opportunities like the next, CARICOM heads of government meeting, where, CARICOM, a clear statement on and a more propositional statement on how to move forward from head of state, could be important to amplify as well. And journalists and civil society, must push for the cohesiveness still on climate finance, to probe leaders and development partners, as I said, on this narrative on additionality. Actually, there's a lot of liquidity. There's trillions of liquidity, but they are not going necessarily where they need to. They need to be aligned with the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Agenda. This is and that is possible, with the reimagining and also the decolonization efforts of the financial system. And I will stop there, but I just wanted to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to continue to collaborate and to amplify,